welcome back to another episode of Inspiration Talks. I'm very excited about today's episode. Today I have Jeanelle Classen with me. In our today's episode, we will be discussing how to balance work life as a nurse. Apart from that, we will also be discussing how to be a valuable team member. So, in order to know more about, let's invite our today's guest before any delay. Hello, Janelle. How are you?
Hey, good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Likewise, firstly, thank you so much for being part of Inspiration Talks. I really appreciate. So, Janelle, can you tell a little about yourself? Like, what do you do? What's your profession?
Mm. So I'm a registered nurse, and that's what I studied. But I also work with other nurses to help beat and prevent nurse burnout because, um, like I was just saying earlier, when it comes to when COVID hit, it really highlighted just how much gaps there are in our nursing world and the support that we have. So yeah, that just kind of fire started and kick started a whole passion that comes to beating and preventing burnout for the shift working person.
That's right. I completely agree. So, how do you manage your work and your home life?
Mm. So I've got two kids. This one, if you can tell, I've got a little 4-week old on my chest here. Hopefully she won't make too much noise. Um, so yeah, I've got a 4-week old and a 2-year old, and then my husband works away for 2 weeks and then he's back for 1 week at a time. So it can get a bit hectic. I'm not going to lie. There are definitely some weeks that are better than others. Especially when I'm having to work as well, and again working shifts. So that is definitely how I manage it, is just by creating. It's really important to me, and this is something that I always say over and over again, is you got to make sure that what is working, you need to find what works, and then you need to keep doing what works, because and then not try to reinvent the wheel. um, and I mean, obviously, if you find something better, then do that instead. But yeah, so it's always about systems and habits to make sure that everything's covered. And I'm a big checklist person as well. So
So, as you mentioned, checklists. So, do you make checklists and like do according to that, or like are you a person who is like who will make checklist on the paper or on the mobile? Like, what do you do?
yeah, so I do a little bit of everything actually. So one of the main things that I always teach on is learning how to unwind. And the reason why I tie unwinding in with checklists is because as women, as usually women, we tend to just keep everything in our heads and try to do everything all the time. And again, nursing is a female-led industry, so you'd be talking to a woman, is we try to keep everything in our head, but what happens is when we leave the ward, our heads are full and we've got, all the things that we wish we did during our shift, or things that we still have to do when we get home. And, I've got to go pick up the kids and I've got to cook dinner and all these things. But then our heads are so full and we just get overwhelmed and we're like, oh my goodness, no one talk to me. I just, want to be alone. But learning how to take all of that busyness and get it out of our heads, and unwinding from, going from maybe work to home or from home to work, is so important, so that we can, show up with a clean slate every time. So I always teach, you got to know how to unwind and transitions between the various roles that we have. When I'm unwinding, I will get it out on paper. And then I will take that, the paper, and I'll put it into a digital calendar. So for me, when I'm doing, this one of my favorite things to do is, when I've got a checklist, it's easy to just have 100 things on our checklist. But what is even better is if you take that checklist and you put it in your calendar, and then you can actually already start ticking things off, because when you've got it booked into your calendar, when you come to that event in your calendar, like, I'm going to do it, rather than just being like, oh, I don't really want to do this thing on my list right now. I'll go do the next thing and the next thing. And then, 4 weeks later, we've still got that original thing on the checklist. So, yeah.
So, when you like go for your shifts, how do you
Mm.
keep your home tensions in home and work tensions in workplace? Like you have kids, so you must be thinking about your kids, what your son would be doing, or like such thoughts usually comes automatically. So in
Yeah.
this case, how do you tackle? Especially when a kid is sick, that time it happens, right?
Yes. Yeah, no, that is very, very tough. And like I'm a big believer in you gotta, if you're at work and something's happening in your home life, of course your priority is usually with your family. And fair enough. So I tend to say to try and keep your focus, it's really important to communicate that with your coworkers and say, look, this is happening for me and my kid or my family. I need to just quickly sort this out. So I will usually ask. And most often, the people that we work with, they are human as well and they have their own family. So they do understand. So it's really important to then communicate, look, this is happening, and not just try and, deal with it all by ourselves. And then just ask, hey, can I take 5 or 10 minutes to just quickly check in or, organize someone to look after my child? Or if you can't organize that, then of course you got to, leave the shift. But if you can, just taking that 5 or 10 minutes to try and have that quick break from work and focus on, fixing whatever is happening outside of work can really help just ease your mind to know that I have, made all the arrangements and now they're looked after. Mum's going to pick them up or whatever you've organized. And if you don't have support, then obviously that looks different for how you would handle it. You would ask someone else, or you might have to just leave the shift. But it's really important to not just try and multitask when it comes to that, because your mind will be busy with, I hope my kid's okay, blah, 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 blah. And then you're distracted when you're doing really important work like administrating medications or whatever, and you need to have focus. So yeah, that's one of my biggest tips is when it comes to trying to, like you say, when you've got tensions in both areas, keeping them separate is just, it's okay to take a quick breather as long as you're communicating it with your team and your coworkers and addressing it in that way.
So basically, team members play an important role, right?
Oh yeah.
So, what is the one myth that nurses believe around being valuable team member?
One myth. Oh, look, the nurses, unfortunately, fortunately, like it's a good thing and a bad thing. We are people pleasers. We want to, we're yes women or yes men, and we always want to say yes, and we don't want to rock the boat. So there's a big myth in our culture that we need to say yes all the time to be able to be a valuable team member. And it's just not the case. It's just that is a myth. And the reason I say that is because if we're constantly saying yes, 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 giving more and more of ourselves, especially giving more and more of ourselves to our work and not balancing that with our life, we burn out, we are overwhelmed, we have so much anxiety and depression, PTSD, trauma, all these things that nurses live with. But when we're just constantly giving, 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 we're pouring from an empty cup. And it's such it's a a common saying. What is it called? It's a cliche because it's true. Is that you can't keep giving from an empty cup. So what's really important is finding our boundaries to say no, and more often, because the more often we say no in a gracious and humble way, the more we can make room for ourselves to show up as our better selves, rather than just running on empty the whole time and then wondering why we just feel like we're drowning the whole time.
Yeah, that's right. If we get trained within like few hours, then the concentration lacks and you're
Yeah,
unable to
absolutely.
concentrate. So, how to prevent burnout during work?
Yeah, so look, it's a big question, because there's so many things that you can do to beat and prevent burnout. But what is one of the key things that I say is, again, like it comes back to the systems, the habits that we have, and making sure that we're balancing that out. So preventing burnout it's not just an overnight fix. It's not just I'm going to say no and now suddenly I'm not burnt out anymore, or that's how I prevent burnout. It is so many things, but one of them is definitely starting with those boundaries and learning how to be healthily selfish. I talk a lot about being healthily selfish in my books and my programs. It's one of the bigger things that we have to learn as nurses, is to say no without being nasty, but setting healthy boundaries. So yeah, that's a big one.
That's right. Always keep the boundaries. in order to prevent the burnout. So how would you know that you're burnt out?
Oh, there are a few key things
Yeah.
that are red flags. I mean, my own story, if I don't think I've shared with you yet, but so my own story is I burnt out within 6 months of graduating from my nursing degree, and that was in the just when COVID hit. So late 2019, early 2020, I started working. And I was just seeing all these nurses around me talking about how, you know, they are struggling with shift work, they are exhausted, overwhelmed. And I was like, oh, I'm feeling those things. But these guys have been doing it for 3, 4, 5, 10 years, and they're still struggling with it. Like, how am I going to manage and how am I going to sustain this for the long term?
Yeah.
Um, and the answer really was, if I don't change something, it's not going to change. And we've got so many nurses leaving the industry because they think they're not cut out for it. When in the meantime, they've actually just not learned or been taught the skills to identify burnout and prevent it. So how do you know you're burnt out? So there's a few things, like I said, is, for example, when you're dreading to go into a shift every time. So for me, I'd wake up in the morning or from, you know, having slept in the day preparing for a night shift, and I would start feeling anxious at the thought of going into work. Um, and many nurses think that that is normal, and it's not. It's not normal to feel dread to go into work. Yes, of course, no, we don't all love working. Like, you know, once you're there, it's great. But there's that extra element of angst of, oh my goodness, like what if something goes wrong, or you know, whatever. Or if you start having trouble sleeping, that's another big red flag. Um, and one thing for me was I was starting to make more and more mistakes. They were small ones, but they were still mistakes that I wouldn't usually make. And that was those were the kind of the red flags. And when I finally spoke up and asked my supervisors, hey, look, I'm seeing these nurses around me in burnout and I am getting burnt out. How can I prevent it? And they're like, look, get used to it. It's not going to change. And that again was a red flag in and of itself, that a superior, an educator would say to a young nurse, get used to it, because they were burnt out as well.
Yeah.
So that's just, I wasn't just gonna, you know, take that as an answer. I decided, look, I need to and find something that works. So I did so much research and found the time and found the hints and the tips, the systems that actually worked, so that when I started implementing them, I started seeing these changes, and I started sharing that with my colleagues. They were like, oh, this is great, it actually works. And I was like, yes, it does, because it's tailored to the very unique needs that nurses have. We've got very, very unique needs because we are shift workers, but also because we tend to be homemakers, mums, you know,
Yeah.
we've got all these other roles. So yeah.
Yeah, I can understand. Actually, I feel like every profession around the world has its own pros and cons, and in every field, a person does gets burnt out. Like
Mm.
there is no profession in the world where a person works and doesn't get burnt out is like
Yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, that is.
For
And
example,
especially
if
when you don't know how to find balance.
yeah, that's right. For example, if I see if I'm recording on daily basis and then I have to edit also everything on the same time, then even I feel like I'm burned out. So yeah, each and everything, even although it's a passion, but still a passion becomes a burnt out somehow,
100%.
sometimes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it just comes back to, like you say, it needs to be sustainable. You need to be able to find that healthy balance between the two.
That's right. I completely agree. So as you mentioned about books, what sort of books did you write about?
Ah, yeah. So I wrote my and self-published my book called Nursing the Nurse: The Ultimate Six-Step Guide to Beating Nurse Burnout. At the beginning of last year is when it went live. And it basically it was a compilation, or it is a compilation of the six main things that I found was key to help beat and prevent burnout. Because when I started my research journey into trying to find what actually worked and how am I going to prevent my own burnout, I only found things that was relevant to CEOs and business owners, stay-at-home moms. You know, it was just for everything except for nurses.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, and so I was like, there's just this huge gap in knowledge. So I
Yeah.
would take the little bits that was helping, that would help a stay-at-home mom, the little bits that would help a CEO, because we've got these unique needs. And I compiled them into this book, and those are the 6 pillars that I always come back to when I teach how to beat and prevent burnout. And that's why I've created my course called Nursing the Nurse, the Ultimate Walkthrough, and eventually my membership, which is a holistic huddle where I've got an expert in exercise, nutrition, mindset coaching. We all just come together to create this really, really needed resource to help nurses move through that burnout and prevent it for the long run. So yeah, so that I wrote that, and I'm so proud of it, because it's just, if I didn't have those resources, I would have burnt out and left the industry a long time ago. I would not have made it through my first year of nursing.
Okay, that's actually very interesting that you are doing a lot for the nursing field. Like you wrote the book and you are like creating awareness for the future nurses, that if they want to know how to keep themselves balanced in their personal life and their work life, they can read that book, and like they can learn a lot. Usually they have to hunt resources online, but by your book they can immediately get knowledge within minutes.
Absolutely, because oh man, I cannot tell you the amount of hours I spent trying to research things. It is any, it's like always just like the tip of the iceberg that we get shared, on free stuff. So it is one of my biggest passions, and one of the biggest things I always talk about is nurses don't get taught how to look after themselves during their training. They mention make sure you look after yourself, but that's like an in passing comment, whereas it gets absolutely drilled into us. If you ask any nurse what is the number one rule of nursing, it's documentation. It's not self-care, which is sad, but every nurse will tell you if it wasn't written down, it didn't happen, and that gets drilled into us. But what doesn't get drilled into us is how do you look after yourself, so that how do you deal with the emotional trauma of having a patient pass away, or with someone abusing you verbally or physically. And it's so important, because we have these nurses who go through these things and they bury it and they don't deal with it, and then in a few years or few months time it explodes, and their relationship starts breaking down. They're not sleeping, they're not eating well, and it's just such a cascade of things. And it's so, I don't want to say it's easy to prevent, but it's so simple to prevent. And yeah, so oh man, I could go on for hours and hours about this stuff.
I can understand, but it's good to share the experience, right? So the people can know what to expect and what not to expect. So what advice would you like to give to those who are watching you right now?
Oh man, I love these questions. So advice to give people who are watching right now. Look, the one thing that I learned when I from a very young age, and again, if we had hours, I would love to share all the various things, the journeys that I've been on. But the one thing that I've learned is its resilience is very, very important. Resilience, and it's not just about pushing through, putting your head down and burying everything. It's about, you get knocked down, work through it, then you can move on. It's not just about piling it on, because then if you can kind of visualize it, the more you put on in your backpack, the heavier it gets, the slower you're moving. So if you can deal with it right then and there, get rid of the load as you go along, much easier to move through, and move on to the next thing, but making sure that you are actually moving on to the next thing and not just getting stuck in that. So yeah, I think that would be the biggest thing, is learning resilience. And if you don't know how to learn resilience, then you got to start by taking that first step, and asking for help, because sometimes we can't do it by ourselves. And it's not because we're lacking in any way. It's just we either didn't get taught, we don't have the example, or there's just not resources readily available to learn it. And it's a skill just like anything else.
That's right. I completely agree. So it was great talking with you, Jimmy. I really enjoyed our today's conversation, and I hope that you also enjoyed. Anything else which you would like to add in the end?
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm so, so grateful. And I mean, like I say, I could talk about this stuff for forever. But I would love to put it out there that if there's anyone who'd want to learn more about beating nurse burnout, I do have a free on-demand video training that people can access, or even if they want to share that with a loved one that they know might benefit from it, because I know you can throw a stone, you'll hit a nurse. Most of us know a nurse or someone in healthcare, and that can be found at www.nursingthenurse.com. And if you want an extra bonus for listening to the inspiration talks, email me. There's an email at the end of the sign-up process that if you email me the word inspire, I'll add on a little bonus, like a little I've got a little checklist for the first 5 things that you can do to help prevent burnout. So if you chuck me an email, I can add that little bonus in for you just for listening to Liba's talk today.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring and learning.